In today's lecture, we're going to be looking at adding extension notes to our chords, because previously everything we've been doing at the moment has been using the triads, that is the first, the third and the fifth of the chord in whichever chord we happen to be using. But as well as playing 1, 3 and 5, there are a whole load of other notes that we can add to that to add a little more colour and texture to our harmonies. So let's dive straight into it. So if we remember back to previous videos, we've got the first, the third and the fifth, and that makes up our chord. But as well as having the first, the third and the fifth to make a major chord, we also have all these other numbers up here that we can use. So a couple of examples: if you add a sixth to a chord, it makes a major chord sound even more majory. If you add a seventh, it's got a sort of jazzy feel to it. A dominant seventh, or a flat seven if you like, we can have that bluesy sound. And we can keep going up: 7th, 9th, 11th, 13, all the way to the top. We can also have sharp 9s, or flat 9s, or flat 11s, or sharp 11s, all that sort of thing. Let's delve straight in and see what musical ideas we can come up with. It's worth mentioning at this point that although we've been focusing primarily on chords and harmony, there are lots of other elements of music that we need to be aware of, such as the dynamics or the melody, timbres and textures. All that sort of stuff needs to be focused on, and that's what we're going to come to later. The reason we've started with chords and with harmony first is because you can create songs and you can create musical ideas without having vast instrumental skills. You don't have to be an amazing pianist or guitarist or whatever in order to create songs using this method, because what we've been doing here is basically mathematics. You can put these songs together even without a keyboard. You can put them together just in a DAW or just on the computer without actually having to know how to play an instrument. The other elements of music, so especially rhythm, dynamics, melody, things like that, that's something that we develop later as we increase our musical skill. So the reason we've started with chords is because that's the probably easiest place to start. Okay, having said that, what we're going to do in this video is, rather than me playing the piano, we're going to do everything without the use of a musical instrument in front of me. So we're going to be using MuseScore or Sibelius scoring techniques. We're going to be using a DAW as well. All the things that you would have access to when you're doing your music course, but you might not necessarily have access to a studio setup like this. So let's see what we can do with these chord extensions. Right, so here are the chords that I came up with. They're pretty simple. I've got C, G, C, F. They're all just pretty basic triads. If we look at them on the circle of fifths again, we start with C, we go to G, go back to C, then to F, and we stay there for a bit. Then we do a diagonal move to E, then we go all the way across to A, and then to D. We do another diagonal move back to G, and then we end up back here at C. I've also added this little bit on here. This is what's called a turnaround. This doesn't necessarily have to be here, but I thought it sounded nice. Also, you'll notice that when you make a nice geometric shape on the circle of fifths, you can also have something that sounds nice. It looks nice when it's written here. It tends to sound nice on here. Again, we're just dealing with mathematics when we put these chord sequences together. Another thing worth pointing out is you don't have to have one chord in each bar. Some of the bars, in fact several of them, have two chords in each bar. So there's my chord sequence. It's not particularly exciting at the moment. It sounds like this. But by adding some nice little extension notes and sevenths and ninths and what have you, we can make that sound much, much, much more interesting. So let's delve straight in. And again, I'm not going to use the piano today. We're just going to use DAW and score writing software. Right, so the chords I have were C, G, C, F, etc., etc., etc. So this is how we enter them in. I make sure I'm in note entry mode. And then, oops, that's in the wrong place. I can just click on it, hit delete, and it goes away. So again, note entry mode. I'm going to put in my chord. So my first chord was C, and it's 4 beats long. So I'll need C, E, and G. My next chord was a G chord. That's G, B, D. Whoops. And my next chord was another C again. Oops. I'm going to go in all the way through, adding my chords as just triads. There's another F in here. Should be able to play that, have a listen to what it sounds like. Great. What I can also do at this point is I can revoice the chords. Rather than having all my chords as a triad like this, I can revoice them. I can move the notes around. So for example, this one, rather than having the G at the top, I might put the G at the bottom. Or leave where it is, or I might put the C at the very top. It's still the same chord. It's still C, E and G. I've just moved the chords around a little bit. Again, let's put that C in the same order. That will do. Right, so I've got all my chords in place. They're just as basic triads. If you're not sure what the notes of each triad should be, there are lots and lots of resources online to tell you how to play or what notes are involved in each of the major and minor triads. There'll also be some resources included in this course. So let's have a listen to what we've got. It's pretty uninteresting at the moment. It's just each of the chords that we see there as a triad. And there's the F. I've got two Fs. You can see the triads tend to look quite neat on the page if you score them out like this. They all just sit nicely on top of one another. Okay, so let's start playing around with it. Let's add some extensions. And then what we're going to be doing is revoicing the chords. That means putting the notes of the chord in a slightly different order. By doing this, you can sometimes create some interesting melodies as well. So let's see what we could do. So with this C major, let's add a sixth to that. So the sixth of C major happens to be A. Yeah, now my C major has a lovely sort of even more majory tone to it. Okay, and then I'm going to change this G here. Rather than the G major, I think I'm going to go G minor. I'm going to see what that sounds like. And then I'm going to do the same treatment with the F. I'm going to make one F a minor. I think we discussed having the minor fifth or the minor fourth chord. Now let's listen to what that sounds like. A couple of changes, one extension, and I've made a couple of the chords minor just to add a little bit of dissonance into it. Okay, let's keep adding things. So our first one was a C. Then we had this G here, a G minor as well, wasn't it? So let's revoice this one, let's say. So the D that's at the top could go to the bottom. There we are. And again, I think I'll use that 6 idea that I used here on this C. I could add a 6. I could also add a 9th, which in this case is D. Great big thick chords. Beautiful. And then the same with the F. Let's add those 6s in again. Let's put the 6 on the F minor, see what that sounds like. Whoops, in the wrong place even. Let me just undo that. It should be like that. There we go. So a 6 added to a minor chord makes it sound even more minory and even more pensive. So let's see what that sounds like now. A few little changes here and there. You'll have to experiment with lots and lots of different chord sequences, just like you've been doing before, until you find your own way of doing things. Everybody's slightly differently. This is the way I've chosen to do it. Your way of doing it might be something different though. But now we've got a nice... You can almost hear a melody coming out of this as well. Right, let's see what we can do with the other chords as well. So I think with a lot of these, I'm going to add sevenths to these because that's probably the more common extension that you're likely to come across, and you can't go too far wrong with it. So this E, this one can be an E seventh. We just add the 7th note of E. So E, G and B is 1, 3 and 5. Go up more to 7. You put the D on the top. Same here. Let's add a 7th to this A. It just sits on the top. It's got a really jazzy feel to it already. Each one of these I'm going to add a 7th to. And then I think I will put a 9 on this one. which is there. Okay, let's have a listen to what that little bit of the sequence sounds like. Already, just by adding those sevenths, it's got a really jazzy feel. Lovely. I'm going to really go to town on this G, I think. Let's see, let's add a 13 to the G. So without going into too much detail, the 13th of G would be an E. So if G is 1, B is 3, D is 5, you keep counting all the way up to 13 and you get an E. So that's going to be A, B, C, D, E, all the way up there. Lovely. Let's see what that sounds like. Is that too much or do I like it? You're going to be changing and experimenting with all sorts of different ideas. See what you think. I can barely hear it. Okay, so that needs revoicing a little bit. Let's see. Let's put the F could go down the bottom. The G could be removed entirely because I think the bass is going to play that. The B can stay where it is. Let's put this E, which is way too high. Let's put it a whole octave down to here. And I'm going to take away this F as well. In later videos, I'll explain the method behind this. But for now, I've taken a G, I've added a load of notes to it. And because it was a little bit crowded, I've taken a few notes out. The notes I've taken out were the first and the fifth, and that's a very useful technique if your chords are sounding too crowded rather. Take the first and the fifth away and it gives it a really nice open sound. So let's listen to the whole sequence, see what we think of it. I've left that triad as it is. There we go. Again, these are a little bit boring because they're just all sat on top of one another. Let's revoice these. So the E for this one, let's put the E on the bottom rather than the top. And the same here, let's put the G down the bottom rather than being on the top. That's a little bit more interesting as well. There we are. Subtle changes. You'll experiment lots and lots with all the different ways of voicing and adding extension notes. I can hear an E needs to be in this one. I can just hear it in my head, and you'll probably come across the same thing. You'll hear melodies and what have you in your head. I really want that E there because I can almost hear the melody jumping out of the score now. Let's have a listen to that bit. Nice. And there's my little turnaround chords. Okay, let's add some root notes into this. I'm going to use all the original root notes of the chord. I'm not going to be changing the roots in this particular one, not like we did in the previous video. So let's see what it sounds like with the bass lines in. Let's use a digital audio workstation. This one we're using here is called Logic. There are lots of other ones out there that you can use, but for now let's just use Logic. We want to add our bass line in a moment, and we're just going to use all the root notes that we decided to use when we originally wrote our chords. Let's have a listen to what those piano chords sound like in Logic rather than in MuseScore. You can just export your score as a MIDI file, drop it straight into any other DAW, and it should read it just fine. But here's what it sounds like. There's that C6. Sounds exactly the same, but we've just used a different program to create it. And you'll notice I've always got the metronome on whenever I'm using a DAW, because part of the requirements when you're doing a music course is that everything is in time. If it's out of time and a bit messy, then that's the sort of thing that would lose you marks. So let's see. Next thing I want to do, I want to add my bass line in. So to do that, in this particular program, we need to go back. I want to find a bass. Let's use this one. It's quite nice and jazzy. There it is. Oh, I've made a mistake there. What have I done wrong? Let's undo that. I should click the little cross to give me a new software instrument. Create gives me a new track. and we're having a bass. I'm going to use the jazzy sounding bass, I think. Double click on there, and then there it is. So in order to put my notes in, if I haven't got a keyboard, I've got the pencil tool, and I just want to add in a C. There's C. Great. And then the next chord we had was a G. So there's G. It's too long, so I want to make it shorter. Then there was another C. Then let me see what was next. It was an F. Oops, I put that in the wrong place. So I just need to go back to my pointer tool and I can move it. There we are. I think there were 4 Fs, one after the other, weren't there? And we can just add those in using the piano roll. Keep going all the way through. And we'll see what it sounds like when it's finished. I've added in the rest of my bass line. I've also extended it here using the same chords with a couple of tiny little embellishments. And it's starting to sound really nice. If I take the metronome off for a moment, it sounds a little bit wooden because it's all quantized, it's all exactly in time, which is what you want to start off with. Then you can add little rhythmic embellishments, that sort of thing, to make it interesting. At the moment there are no dynamics, nothing like that. It's really quite dry, but that's what we're going to be looking at later on. I think what I'd like to do is copy and paste that. So I just right click, copy, move the playhead to where I want to copy it to, right click again and paste. Oh, and drag it into the right place. There we go. Now it's longer. What I could also do, I could enhance that, start thinking about texture and timbre a little bit. Another software instrument. Let's go for some strings this time. Let's see, where are we? Cinematic, I think they are. No, they're not. Orchestral, of course. Strings. That'll do. Okay, I'm going to use the exact same chords that I've got here. Remember, I already copied them. I could paste them into here. So with those strings as well, let's see what my song sounds like. One thing it's definitely missing is some drums. I think we need to add a little bit of rhythm into here. So let's put a very, very basic drum beat in. That'll do. Doesn't really matter what the drum kit is. Let's see what those strings sound like. They might be too much, they might not. They're quite nice. If I were to add the drums in. Lovely sort of jazz ballad. And there we are. Adding extensions to a piece of music just brings out all the colour in those chords, and that's all we did on that particular piece. So there you have it. That's a very quick, simple guide as to how to add extension notes, so 6s, 7s, 9s, etc, etc, extensions to chords to make them sound a little more colourful, a little more interesting. In that chord sequence that we just used, there were no changes of root notes, there were no real dissonances, there were no things like that. We just used ordinary triads and then added 1, maybe 2 extra notes to each of them to make them sound a little more interesting, a little more colourful than they were before. So in the next few videos, we're going to start putting all these ideas together to see what sort of songs we can create, and we're also going to start focusing a little bit more on the specification for GCSEs and IBs and A-levels and that sort of thing, so that what you're creating is also working well with what the examiner is expecting you to do. Okay, we'll see you in the next one.